Sri Gurubhyo Namaha children. Welcome to Online Teaching Academy, Ekalaiva. Class 8, Social Science. We are going to see in this class the remaining part of the lesson, the Nationalist movement from 1885 to 1919. So, in the last session we have seen about the various factors which were responsible for the growing sense of nationalism among Indians. As a result of the growing sense of nationalism, many associations were formed in India. Those associations were limited in number and scope, that is, the members were limited and scope were also limited. The members of the association were educated Indians and they belonged to upper sections of the society. So, they sent petitions to the British government and those petitions were simply ignored by the British. And those associations were restricted to a limited region. So, there was a need for all India association which will involve all the people of the country. The whole country, they wanted to involve the people of the whole country. So, the retired British civil servant Alan Octavian Hume came forward to found the Indian National Congress in 1885. So, he formed this association he wanted to form this association under the supervision of the British, and he wanted to make the British government to know the demands of the Indian people. He formed this association mainly because he did not want to a major outbreak which took place in 1857, the revolt of 1857, isn't it? So, he did not want another outbreak to happen in India. So, he formed an association called Indian National Congress in 1885. So, in the initial stages, the Congress was a forum for nationalists around the country to air their grievances. So, in the early stages of Congress, many leaders from various parts of the country were invited together and they wanted to discuss about the India's problems and they wanted to take an action plan which will solve the problems of India. It was also meant to promote the growth of a political consciousness. So, it was formed mainly to promote the consciousness among the people of India. So, it was formed by A.O. Hume and W.C. Banerjee was the first president of the Congress. And the first 20 years of the Congress was dominated by moderates. Who were moderates? There were the nationalist leaders who approached the British in a soft and smooth way. So, they sent petitions and appeals to the British government. So, they aimed only to have a greater share. They wanted to have a greater share in the policy making and activities of the British government. So, these moderates approached the British government in a smooth and soft approach. So, they were called as moderates. So, they requested the British government to give the right of speech and expression, to reduce taxes and to held the civil service examination in India also and not only in England. And they wanted to reduce the taxes which were laid on the peasants. And they wanted to stop the draining of wealth from India to Britain. So, these were the petitions. And also they wanted to have a major share in the administration posts. So, these were the petitions sent by the moderates. But those petitions were not at all considered by the British. And there were another set of leaders called radicals. So, the moderates approached the British in a soft and smooth way. these radicals approached the British in a different way. That is, they held strong political activities like calling of strikes, boycotting of British goods and British institutions, and holding demonstrations. So, by all these activities, these leaders showed their opposition towards the British. So, the petitions of the early Congress leaders yielded no results. So, petitions were not at all considered by the British. They did not take any action against the petitions issued by the moderates. Some leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal and Lala Lajpat Rai increasingly disillusioned. These leaders were dissatisfied about the approach of moderates. So, they held strikes, boycotts and demonstrations, and they were dissatisfied with the soft approach of the moderates. They acted in a different way. So, they demanded Swaraj. Swaraj means complete independence. They didn't want any share from the British government. They wanted complete independence. So, complete independence from British were demanded by the radicals. These leaders came to be known as radicals, and our Bal Gangadhar Tilak declared, Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it, was the saying declared by Bal Gangadhar Tilak. And in July 1905, there was a proclamation of the Partition of Bengal. So, since 1765, Bengal had been a large province and single province comprising West Bengal, East Bengal, East Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. It emerged as the hub of nationalism. Hub means center of nationalism. That is, the national movement was very strong in Bengal. Lord Curzon, when Lord Curzon became the Viceroy of India, he sensed the danger of such a united front to British interest. So, he decided to partition and separate the Muslim dominated East Bengal from West Bengal. So, Lord Curzon divided Bengal into two as East Bengal and West Bengal. The reason said by him was, since Bengal was the large province, it was very difficult for administration. So, he wanted to divide Bengal into two. But the actual reason was not that. He wanted to divide the unity among Muslim people and Hindu people. The official reason given for the partition was easier administration, and Bengal was partitioned in October 1905. It was divided in 1905. Curzon's decision was in line with the policy of divide and rule. Divide Hindus and Muslims separately, and ruling was the decision of Lord Curzon. The decision was strongly opposed by the people, but it was not accepted by the people. There was hartals, demonstrations and processions. The people did not accept the division of Bengal. Nationalist movement in Bengal was very strong. Actually, the idea was to weaken the nationalist movement. Instead of weakening, it became very strong. It became increasingly stronger than before the partition of Bengal. So, it was a deliberate attempt to weaken the nationalist movement. In 1905, the boycott and Swadeshi movements were started. So, because of the partition of Bengal, to oppose that, Indian nationalists reacted to the partition by launching the boycott and Swadeshi movements. So, the Indian nationalists reacted to the partition by launching the boycott and Swadeshi movements. What is boycotting? That is avoiding the usage of British goods. And Swadeshi movements means producing goods in our own country, using our own goods and boycotting the British goods. So, they boycotted to use goods made by the British and began to promote the manufacture of Swadeshi products. So, they encouraged the people to produce goods in India, and people started to buy and use our own products, and they boycotted the British products. Bonfires of British cloth were also held. As a result, Swadeshi textile mills, soap and match factories, banks and insurance companies came up everywhere. So, these led to a revival of local Indian industry. So, actually the British destroyed agriculture and handicrafts. Those handicrafts industries again came into existence. Then national schools and colleges were also founded in various parts of the country, many of which began imparting training in Swadeshi crafts. That is, students were given training by doing, they were given practice by to do Swadeshi crafts, to do goods which can be made by their own hands. The British reacted to the movement by arresting and deporting thousands of Swadeshi workers, including students. So, the British did not allow this, and they reacted to the movement by arresting various leaders, and they removed thousands of Swadeshi workers, including students. The formation of the Muslim League. So, with the growing presence of the Congress, some Indian Muslim leaders began to feel that it was an organization which had Hindu majority. They began to feel that it was a Hindu majority organization. They thought that Indian National Congress was a Hindu majority organization which did not adequately represent their interest. That is, the Muslims' interests were not represented. They thought in that way. So, they felt the need for a separate platform for them. So, they wanted to have a separate platform to cater their needs, to represent their needs. So, some Muslim leaders met at Shimla to discuss the formation of such an organization. Finally, at a conference in Dhaka in 1906, All India Muslim League was founded. And there was a split between moderates and radicals in the session which was held at Surat. So, this eventually resulted in a split between the two at the Surat session of the Congress, because there was an ideological differences, because moderates wanted to approach the British in a soft and smooth way. Radicals approached in a different way. They wanted strong political actions to be taken. So, there was a difference of opinion among the moderates and the radicals. So, this resulted in a split between the two at the Surat session of the Congress in 1907. In the light of the split, the moderates restated the goal of the Congress to be the attainment of self-government within the British Empire. So, the British took this as an advantage and came down heavily upon the radicals, and many leaders were arrested. Leaders like Tilak were imprisoned. So, after the split between the moderates and radicals, the British took the advantage of the split and they came down heavily upon the radicals, and leaders like Tilak were imprisoned. The rise of the revolutionaries. Other than moderates and radicals, there were also leaders called revolutionaries. So, due to the repressive policies means the policy which suppress the people, the policy which do not give any freedom to the people of India. Because of these policies of the British government, a section of nationalists began to adopt militant methods, that is using bombing, looting, all those methods were followed by a section of people called revolutionaries. Some prominent revolutionary leaders were Khudiram Bose, Prafulla Chakki, Aurobindo Ghosh, Vanchi Iyer and V.D. Savarkar. Newspapers such as Yugantar in Bengal and Kal in Maharashtra helped to propagate the ideas of revolutionaries. But these revolutionaries were suppressed by the British. Many leaders were arrested, some of them were hanged, some of them were driven away from our country. And to pacify the moderates, that is, because of the partition of Bengal, the Indian National Congress leaders were dissatisfied about the British rule. So, to pacify the moderates, John Morley, the Secretary of State in England, Lord Minto, passed the Indian Councils Act of 1909, popularly known as the Morley-Minto reform. They brought a reform. What was that reform? They just increased the number of elected members to the central and provincial legislative councils. Simply they increased the number of members, that's all. But they did not give the Swaraj. Okay. So at the same time, the act also introduced separate electorates for the Muslims, to pacify the Muslims. To pacify the moderates, they introduced the Indian Council Act. In that they increased the elected members. To pacify the Muslims, they introduced separate electorate for Muslims. So they convinced the leaders by doing this, but they did not give self-rule. Okay. So the Morley-Minto reforms just convinced the Indian leaders, including those belonging to the Muslim League, but they did not grant the self-rule. So, realizing this, the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League started to unite them to fight against the British rule. And the Government of India Act. The continued pressure got from the leaders of India, the British decided to introduce the Government of India Act. So, according to this act, the number of members were elected and the dual system was followed. What was the dual system? Some important departments were held by the British, the remaining were given to the Indian leaders. So, the departments like finance, law and order and police remained with the British. The other departments like education, agriculture and health became the departments which were held by the Indian leaders. Here also there were no nearer to the self-rule. Here also they are following the dual system. They are giving some responsibility to the Indians, but they did not give complete independence to the people of India. So this was nowhere near the Swaraj demanded by the Congress leaders. So we have come to the end of the session, children. We will meet in the next class. Thank you. To receive our online lessons, press the subscribe button and you will receive the latest videos. Thank you, children.